I'm going to be spending some time, as I said, talking about living purposefully, living purposefully, in particular, finding your purpose. But the focus that I'm going to be on it, just looking at specific areas, and I will share that with you earlier on. But just for the benefit of anybody who might be watching today, by the way, the chat's available. We're making notes and summaries in there. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in there. I will answer them at the end. So if you can just put a capital Q in front of your question, and in that way, I can then spot them later on and then move them and move you forward. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. So if you have any questions, feel free. And there are ladies who are helping me in the chat who are going to be putting information on there. So please let me know. But again, welcome to everybody who's joining us today. This is Living Purposely, Finishing Strong. It's a part of my ministry, Grace Famoriyo Ministries. And the whole idea is to literally support women continue their journeys in Christ, but finish strong. That's really the key thing of what we're trying to do here today. Continuing our journeys and finish strong. I don't know about you, but this journey of life, this journey of faith, it can be a bit, it can be a bit difficult sometimes. And, and this meetup, it's every second Saturday of the month. And the whole idea is for us to gather together to press pause on what's going on in our lives and just invest in our time in the presence of God. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is all around that ethos, living purposefully, but finishing strong. Now, some of you know that, I've written a number of books, and some of my books include Overcoming Emotional Baggage, Bounce Back, Healing a Discouraged Heart, and a whole raft of other books. The forum of the purpose of this forum is to help women finish without burnout, without baggage, or without the blues. Okay, so without burnout, without baggage, or the blues. That for me has been, we'll talk about this another time, but that really has been my life story in terms of some of the major stumbling blocks that can hinder us from reaching the goal, the end. Those who know me know that my personal vision in life is just literally when the time comes, if Christ comes back first, or if, my time comes, I need to hear welcome and well done, good and faithful servant. That's what drives me. But I've also recognized that along our journey, the enemy will do 101 things to stop every single one of us from fulfilling our purpose. He will put things in the way. He will, derail people. He would, stumbling blocks, our insecurities. Remember I talked about, being in a surroundings where it seems messy, and Father just kind of, stopped me and said, no, I can still use mess. So this is a forum to help women live purposefully, serving God, fulfilling their calling, their purposes, their assignments without the baggage, without the blues, and without burnout. Last time we talked about finding peace. And as you know, that we're in a world which is kind of like being turned on its head. So many things are happening. If anybody was to tell us over a year ago that this is where we'll be today, I think all of us would be like, nah, never, not in a month of June's, but look at where we are today. Our world has changed. And so we started the journey. The first session we did was really about finding peace. So finding peace in a tumultuous time, finding peace, peace to be able to go to bed at night without your stresses worrying you. Sometimes how you can have things playing replay on a loop in your head. You can't sleep, you can't focus. And so this is kind of like the forum where we're really trying to help unpick some of those things, and so that we can be the women that God has called us to be. And that's really what we're doing. So we meet up second Saturday of every month, same time, same place. If you've registered on your Zoom link, you don't need to, if you've registered once, you don't need to register again. Use the same link in your email. Just keep clicking that link and it will just bring you straight through. But you know what, this is what we're trying to do. And through the grace of God, I know that God is going to use it as an opportunity to touch lives. And by all means, spread the word, let people know, so that we could get as many women finishing strong on their journeys in life. Now, today is really about finding purpose. And, when I was praying about, okay, Father, what should I talk about? The strong sense of purpose came into mind. And so today really is about finding purpose after change and after challenges. And I put that in there because, and I will unpick that later on, but it's about finding purpose in times of change and in times of challenge. And, just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I wear many, many hats, as some of you probably know. I have a number of organizations that I run, secular businesses that I run. My passion is to help women in particular, so that you'll always keep hearing me saying women. But one of the things that I do, in addition to writing books and the ministry side of things, is I help women leaders and experts become well-paid thought leaders. So that's something that I do on the side. If that's something you want to find out about, just put, tell me more in the chat box, and then I'll send you some more information, or in the comments, depending on where you're watching this. In addition to that, as I said, I've written a number of books, and I have to say that, some of the, in fact, let me just scrap that. All the books I've written have come about as a result of my own personal experiences. And I'm going to be sharing with you later down, in this session, how God has used some of my ups and downs, challenges, burdens to kind of pivot me in a direction that I probably would have never thought of doing back in the day, until, he started to uncover his purpose. So today, really, I'm going to be taking snippets out of the book Bounce Back. Okay, so this is my baby, How to Survive, Thrive, and Maximize Challenging Situations. It's quite a big book. Okay, so I'm not going to be doing that. We only have not a long time. So I'm only going to be talking for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have time to we're going to have a reflective time, and then we'll have and then we'll wrap up. But as most of you know, I'm also a coach, in addition to being an author and a speaker. So Coach Grace does come out in these sessions. I'm going to be asking you some reflective questions, and there'll be some music playing in the background. That will be opportunity just to mull on some of the things that we've said, and perhaps even Father's been speaking to you as we're talking. It's a great opportunity to write those things down. In fact, that's a really point I wanted to mention as well. It's the power of writing things down. I cannot overemphasize the power. I mean, you probably can't see over my shoulder, but on one particular bookshelf, I have just journals, prayer journals for the last 20 years. The words Father's told me, his Logos word, his Rhema word, his promises to me, the visions he gives me, and all those kind of things. I have collated them, and every so often I bring them out and I pray over them, and I remind God of his promises. And that's so important because, as I said, on this journey, it's fraught of distractions, ups and downs, and what I call what's the word I call it? Unscripted life moments. It's full of so many things that if you're not careful, it's quite easy to lose sight on a lot of things, in particular, those intimate moments that we have with God. And this is one of the things that we're trying to cultivate here. It's cultivating intimacy with God. That's, to be honest, your strength and the thing that's going to get you through challenging life situations. So, use this opportunity to get yourself a journal, a notebook. If you like more electronic, get your phone out and make notes. And feel free to capture what God is saying to you, not just what I'm saying, capture what the Spirit of God is saying to you. So as I said, I'm going to be sharing snippets of the book. And as you can see, I do read my own book. I read my own books. I always have, I go back to them. I'm like, did I write that? Cool, blimey. Okay, all right. So that's what we're going to be focused on today. So let's just dive in terms of living purposefully. So when we talk about the whole idea of purpose, a number of people would, say, so what's purpose then? And, what's that all about? Well, when I talk about purpose, for me, there are two definitions. Well, the first one is about, the first definition, the way a dictionary called it, is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. Now, every one of us has a purpose, regardless of what people tell us. Some people, they've maybe been told as a child that, you're a mistake, you're a waste of space. But in God's eyes, every single one of us is here for a reason, And so I like to think myself, as well as you, as Esther's, because, the Bible talks about Esther, when Mordecai was encouraging her, and he says, who knows, perhaps you were born for such a time as this. And I'll throw that back out to everybody who's watching this, because the reality is, I could have been born in the Victorian times. You could have been born 50 years from now, but God in his mercies had this big plan, in his big strategic book up in heaven. And he decided, Grace and everybody watching here today, I need you for now. Okay, so that's why me and you show up. So we were all created for such a time as this. Now, another definition is that we sometimes actually overlook is the idea about an intended or desired result. So that's what purpose is, or a person's sense of resolve or determination, or set as an aim or intention or a goal for oneself. So to set an aim or intention as a goal for oneself. And that's, really, really something to think about. So on one hand, it's about something being created for a specific purpose. But there's also another sense where it talks about an intention, a goal, an aspiration. And I'm going to be holding those two together, because I really do believe that all those are very, very important when it comes to us moving forward. So I'm going to keep referring to that. And, as I said, a number of times, people, kind of say, people ask me, so what's my purpose? And I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, I'm going to be clarifying a few things. And then I believe that, that would then come and make sense as we make our way through our journeys. But I'm also going to be using two words. So you might hear me say purpose, and you might hear me say assignment. Now, I believe, again, just like I said earlier on, every one of us has an overarching purpose while we're here on earth. But I also believe that under that, so if you just imagine, little spokes coming from this big thing, or like an umbrella, think of an umbrella, umbrella, there's a central thing in the middle, and then it has little things that comes down that actually forms, the material that covers us. See those little spokes as your assignment. That's your assignment. And so you might hear me talk about assignments, your purpose. And so just keep, that's basically what I'm referring to. And I do believe that a number of us have purpose-linked assignments that we're supposed to be fulfilling. So it may not necessarily be the big, you might be thinking, oh, but I haven't had my burning bush moment, like Moses. Like when Moses, Exodus 4, where he saw the burning bush and God invited him, to come closer, and God started to reveal to him what he was going to be doing. We may not necessarily all have those big burning bush moments, nor might you be, called out of a crowd like David was, and have oil poured on your head, or maybe hands laid on you and said, go ye and do whatever it is, because in fact, your purpose might even be in the secular world and not so much, in the church, like a pastor, prophet, teacher, and all that kind of offices. But regardless of whether you've had any of those moments or not, you still have a purpose. And we're going to be looking at that whole concept. In fact, when people ask me, so Grace, what is it that you do? I always say to people, I'm in full-time service of His Majesty the King. And they're like, what? Okay, so I say I'm in full-time service of His Majesty the King. And the reason why I say that is because, many years ago, some of you who may know me may know my story, and the fact that at one point I wanted to become, a doctor, and I fought tooth and nail. And it's like everything was just against me becoming a doctor, until I discovered actually years later on that, Father said, yeah, you will heal people, but it will not be through medicine as we know it. Except that I only discovered that, 30 years later, but, so over the years, I've kind of like given myself over to Father and saying, what, okay, I'm going to throw out the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan, and, the go-getter in me. I'm not saying that I'm not, but what is it that you want me to do? And I remember many years ago when, out of frustration, because there were some things I was doing and I wasn't getting the results. and I just said, okay, what is it you want? And what the simple answer was this around, 2004 was, I want you to write. I'm like, really? Is that what it is you want me to do? Yes, I want you to write. But I'm like, Lord, I just started a coaching practice. I can't just write full time. Nobody's giving me a contract. But he said, I want you to write. And you know what? That became the beginning of a journey that has, that was back in 2004. And that's really been the beginning of a journey, that's unfolded in ministries and yes, even coaching organizations further down the line. It's opened up to so many things. Now, why am I saying that? Again, you know me, I like to lay foundations and I like to lay principles in terms of how we work. Sometimes that purpose doesn't unfold until you take the very first step that he told you to take, the very first thing. So you might be saying, but it's not working. Again, that's why I said, go back to your journal. What was the last thing he told you to do? That is so important. And, as I said, I've kind of condensed my frustrations in a few sentences, but it wasn't at the time because I was like, for Pete's sake, why am I not getting the results I want? And eventually, when I get to a point where I sit on the floor of my office, cross my legs and fold my arms like a kid who's having a tantrum, and God knows, okay, she needs my attention. And I just sit there like, Lord, what is it that you want? And as I said, it started off with the book. Okay, Lord. And I started with the book. And from there, Overcoming Emotional Baggage came about. From there, I got an email from a women's ministry in America saying, we use the book. Is there a training course? And I'm like, training course? Okay, hold that thought. Of course, I went to create training courses from those who've been with me on my journey. Later down the line, Father asked me to do the Overcoming Emotional Baggage Women's Conference. It's like, Lord, why would you tell me to do that? I'm an introvert. I don't like standing on the stage. But you can see how he's kind of like gotten rid of all of that, those kind of, little issues that I had. I'm still an introvert, but I've learned to adapt it and, use it, play to my strengths and use it to fulfill his purposes. But again, I'm saying all of this to say it started with one thing led to the other and then opened the door to another and opened the door to another. So as I'm talking today, I want you to just open your ears and more importantly, open your heart. What is God pointing you to? Is there something perhaps that you were supposed to have done that maybe because a life happened, you just kind of put it on hold? Keep an open mind and just ask God to speak to you and enlighten the eyes of your understanding so that you can move forward. But as I said, when with me, when people ask me what I'm supposed to be doing, I say I'm in full-time service as Majesty the King. And depending on what I'm doing at that time, I listen quite intently. What do you want me to do? Okay, you want me to do this? Okay, fine. Everything else takes a back burner and I focus on that. And I really encourage you to start to live your life like that. Now, I know some people are saying, but I have a job. Yep, you can have a job, you can have a business, you can have whatever it is that you want. But ultimately, our boss or our employer is him. Ultimately, our employer and our boss. So you might hear me say my chairman, I'm talking to him. He's the one who devises our strategies. He decides which area we're going to. And so I just want you to keep that in mind when we're starting to talk. So let's talk about this whole idea of purpose and let's start to unpack what that is. So I want to talk about 6 different ways that God can reveal our purpose to us. So 6 different ways that God can reveal our purpose to us. Now, excuse me. Now, the first one is actually through a burden. Now, you might think, well, what do you mean by burden? Okay, let's unpick the story of Nehemiah. Now, if you remember the whole book of Nehemiah, in fact, it's a very good book to read. I mean, there's only, I can't remember how many, is it 8 chapters or 10 chapters, but it's a very quick book. If you're in business, ministry, whatever you're doing, just read Nehemiah, because that is a book that is filled with so many strategies on how to build God's things. And when I say God's things, please hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's about business, or it's about ministry, but because I believe that anything that we want to do in life, there are strategies and there are principles in the Bible for us to emulate. Okay, so the first one is really burden. Now, if we start to look at the story of Nehemiah in the first chapter, Nehemiah tells us that he had a burden. he had a burden for what was going on back home. He had a burden, and he wanted to see something done concerning, the wall in particular, because he was speaking to somebody and they gave him the report that actually back home, the walls of Jerusalem have been destroyed, and just it was such a negative report that the Bible tells us, if you read the first chapter, it tells us he was sorrowful. He was, he was filled with that burden. And then on top of that, he went into fasting and prayer. And, shortly, because he was the king's cupbearer, the king noticed that and said, well, what's going on? You're not normally like this, chappie. What's going on? And then he then told the king what the problem was. And, talk about divine favor. His burden, his prayer, and his fasting opened the door to what I can only call phenomenal favor, that the king will release him to go and build, the walls of Jerusalem. And if you fast track through that whole scripture, they built it in 52 days. Now, 52 days, God gave him strategy. God gave him focus. God gave him everything he needed, but it started with a burden on his heart. So again, perhaps God has put a particular person, a cause, a need, a group of people, a person, he's put something on your heart. Again, pay attention to that, because that could just be Father trying to get your attention to something he wants you to do. Now, remember with Nehemiah, all he needed to do was yield himself to that burden, and God did the rest. So don't think about, oh my God, it's so big. I was telling somebody the definition of a vision. A vision is something that is so big that it will have to be completed even beyond your own life, span. So if you're thinking of something and, it's something that you could do, it's not big enough. There's a little tip there, Coach Grace coming out here. Okay, so it's a burden. That's the first one. Now, the second one is about our passions. Now, it's interesting how God can use even your passions, even bad ones, and flip it over its head for his glory. Now, this one in particular, it was somebody who I love. I mean, I can't wait to meet this guy. When I get to heaven, Paul is the guy. When I get to heaven, I cannot wait. I will just say, number one, respect, brother. Okay. Number two, what was it that kept you going? You were shipwrecked, presumed dead so many times, stoned and whipped. What kept you going? But if you notice, if you backtrack a little bit, Paul has always been a passionate man. He's been a zealot all his life. Even though he was, the wrong mindsets, he was persecuting the Jews at the time, but God used that passion and flipped it and used it to do tremendous things for the glory of God after his conversion, to the point whereby God used him to write a chunk of the New Testament, a number of them while he was in chains. But it was that same passion that God used. So again, that's an indicator. If God's given you a passion for something. So some people might be, I had a friend who's passed away, and her passion was just children. From the time I met her, to the time she passed, that must be close to 30 years. She was in children's ministry. Eventually, she became the head of children's ministry in her church. But she loved children so much that she actually, it's amazing. Just a few years before she passed away, went back to university and did child development and brought her learning back into her children's ministry, to the point whereby that children's ministry became phenomenal in the country, phenomenal, to the point whereby, at her funeral, you had toddlers all the way to graduates attending the funeral because she was their teacher. And it's just interesting how God can use our passions to serve people and to change people's lives. So don't dismiss the passions that God gives you, because who knows who that person or those people he might be calling you to serve. Now, the third one is gifting. Another way that God can use to reveal our purposes is our gifting. And there are two great guys, again, as I said, that my list is growing. The more I keep going through the Bible, the people I want to meet in heaven, the list is growing longer and longer. And two of them whose gift made room for them. The Bible says your gift will make a room for you and bring you before great men. Two people, Daniel and Joseph. Both of them phenomenal people. Daniel 1, if you read Daniel 1-3, in fact, the whole book of Daniel, but Daniel 1-3, and, you know, Joseph, when he first started, they both had the gift of interpretation of dreams. They both had that gifting, and that gifting, as we all know, opened the door for them. They used that gift. And remember I said, God starts with one thing. Use that one thing he's given you, or follow the instruction. And before you know it, you're going on to the next thing and the next thing. Now, in Daniel and Joseph's case, both of them actually ended up with phenomenal leadership opportunities because of that gifting. But it would have never happened if they were hiding behind a cubby hole or thinking, oh, I can't do this, it's only me, you know, or in Daniel's case, in fact, both cases, they're both slaves. You know, Daniel had been carted off to Babylon. You know, Joseph had been sold into slavery and was working in Potiphar's house, then ended up in prison. You know, so they had really bad beginnings, but see how God used that gifting. And that's why it's so important. You know, I say this all the time, that, you know, whatever God's in your hand, it's to use for his glory, and we really can't afford to sit on it. So again, that's one of the ways that God uses. Now, the next one actually is our positions. Some of us, God has placed in places. Some, it could be strategic positions. It could be as a leader somewhere. It could even be as an employee in a company. Regardless of where you find yourself, your position is key. And if God has put you in that particular place, if God has put you in that particular place, it's worth paying attention. In fact, wherever you find yourself today, it's worth asking the question, Lord, why am I here? Now, I remember many years ago, I talked about me wanting to become a doctor, but, you know, I eventually did biochemistry. And then later on, shortly after that, I did a master's in IT. And you know what, and then I moved into leadership development and training. And for some years, I was, you know, God created a phenomenal door. I'll talk about it another time. In fact, I'll talk about it very quickly because it's linked to the writing as well. You know how I said, Father said, you know, I want you to write. And I'm like, but I want to start my coaching practice. I want you to write. I want to start my coaching. This is the argument going back and forth, right? Eventually, I'm like, okay, I yield. And I did that. And, you know, in doing that, remember I said I didn't have a publishing contract, nobody paying me. I was just doing it diligently, sometimes between 2 and 8 hours a day, just writing. This is back in the day when I didn't learn how to write fast. Now I can write a book in a weekend kind of thing. But then took about 6 years. But I was writing and doing it faithfully, diligently. I didn't realize that God was actually paying attention, because one day I got a phone call from a company to say, hey, we need a coach to come and be part of a project that we're running in a London borough. Are you free? And at that point, because I was so focused on the book, I thought, is this a distraction? Lord, I don't want to fall prey of being distracted. But I just sensed him saying, no, just listen to what they have to say. To cut a long story short, this ended up being my Elijah being fed by the brook moment. You know, for 5 solid years, you know, God created opportunity where I was able to use skills and develop skills and speak to people. But the key thing is this, because I could have, even though I was trying to build my own coaching practice, nothing would have ever got me to the positions that God did, because there was a time I was literally call it a triple promotion, but here I was standing before chief executive of global 500 and 100 companies, training them, coaching them. It's like, how did I get here? You know, I remember being, you know, in a particular major global company, you know, in Seattle, there were very few European cities and cities in the UK where I didn't work. And again, it was always senior management to management. In fact, there were times I was called on as part of a team to help organizations elect new chief executives for countries, you know, so global companies who are looking to appoint other managing directors in the country. You know, I was part of the panel, and then having to give a talk to the board to say why they should appoint You know, there were times when, you know, I had to teach a lot of do programs, 5-day programs with, again, very senior people, to the point whereby people were then asking me, you know, I'll never forget this. Many years ago, you know, during this period, I sat in front of a group of guys, obviously gray hair. They've been as leaders longer than I was alive at that time, you know. And, I'll never forget in the evenings, because normally in the evenings we'll go and eat together, in a restaurant. And, one of them said to me, well, how on earth do you know all this stuff that you know? Because it's obvious that you're so young, we've been doing this longer than you've been alive, kind of thing. And I'm like, I obviously gave him a response, but I'm thinking, you have no clue. It's called bathroom ministry. Okay, yes, I do read my Harvard Business Reviews. Yes, I have the training materials that I prepare for, but you know what? It's been on my knees, seeking God's face. Lord, these people, I don't know what to say to them. These are very senior people, but God gave me the ability to speak to these people. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying that because all throughout that 5-year period, I kept saying to Father, what's the kingdom relevance for all of this? Because for me, everything's about the kingdom. Even in the secular world, everything's about the kingdom. It's one thing being flown, but my friends used to envy me because sometimes after church, I'll be heading to the airport, being flown somewhere. I never did all this commuting and traveling, on the tube or trains. It was like chauffeur driven to your client's location, that kind of thing, flown business class. So I always said, God, I recognize that this is a privileged opportunity. What is the kingdom relevance for this? Little did I know that he was setting me up for so many things. Number one, getting that introvert I talked about earlier on to be able to sometimes speak in front of, I had I had somebody recently contact me. She'd been promoted to the C-suite, so she's now in a chief operating officers for a major company. And she was asking me about executive coaching and how I could support her, because all of a sudden she was now standing before the board, okay, of global organization, having to do monthly presentations. And she was like, help, Grace. And then I remembered. So I was able to share some things that I'd learned from back in the day, to build her confidence, to be able to go out there and, do the thing. So again, I'm going to keep saying this. Wherever you find yourself today, ask God today, what is the kingdom relevance for why I'm here? There is a reason. From that experience, I've grown, being able to stand on platforms. No, I mean, we all still have butterflies, but it's different now. I'm not afraid of people's faces. I can stand there, and whoever you are, you could be, chief executive. It doesn't matter. You're a human being, and I can talk to you. And there's sometimes I'd sit eyeball to eyeball in a meeting with them. No big deal. Again, why are you where you are today? Ask Father that, and then ask him, what is the kingdom relevance? Who am I here to support? Who am I here to influence? Because it's all about influencing and changing people's lives, or more importantly, transforming lives. Now, going back to the third point I was talking about, your position, a classic example in the Bible was Esther. Esther, one day she was an orphan. Okay, she still was an orphan, but we see her as an orphan being, looked after by her uncle Mordecai. And all of a sudden she gets transitioned into, one of those ladies potentially taking over Vashti's position. And from there, she found favor of God and eventually became the queen. Now that is just phenomenal. And you know what? Esther could have said, oh, I'm an orphan, I don't have anything to offer. But, I believe that through the grooming, training, mentoring, and of her uncle, she was able to, and the support of even the eunuch that supported her, she was able to sort of like lift her head up high and eventually attract favor of God. Now, if you look later down the line, it was Esther who God used to save the Jews from being completely annihilated, completely. God used her. So again, your position is important. Wherever you find yourself today, high, low, society, in church, outside of church, there is a reason for why you are where you are today. There is a kingdom relevance. Number 5, our insecurities. You believe it or not, God can even use our insecurities to serve him. He can. It's just amazing how, that's why I love reading the Bible. I have a goal of trying to read the Bible once every year. And this year I'm just about to finish, and I'm probably going to start it again. And I like to do it in different versions every year. And it never ceases to marvel the things and the people God uses to achieve his purposes. And that's you and I. Remember I said earlier on that, during time of worship, I just sensed, if everything just seems messy, I don't feel right. And he's like, but regardless, I will still use you. And that's really humbling to know that Father will still use us. Now, in terms of our insecurities, the classic story I want to pick out, it's not an obvious one, but the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, Samaritan woman, you know who I mean, okay, John 4, who God, demonstrated his loving kindness and his favor by having Jesus Christ show up without the disciples to distract him, because you know how they are between Peter and the rest of them, like, oi, Jesus, why are you talking to her? Move away. We don't talk with them, kind of thing. But God strategically put the occasion together whereby the woman, was with Jesus, it's just the two of them having, a chat. And, from that, we discovered, that Jesus revealed that, she's already had 5 husbands. In fact, she's with the 5th one. And the one she's with isn't married. And she's like, oh, my God. Now, we know that this blessed lady, like some of us, had baggage. OK, but here was somebody who actually paid attention to her, who listened to her, who had dialogue with her, who shouldn't really be talking with her, but cared enough to share with her. And the next thing you know, this lady with her past was the one who ran back into town and became an overnight evangelist and started to tell people, come and see a man who's told me my life story. So God can use us at whatever stage of our lives to live his purpose, to fulfill his purpose. I really believe that that woman didn't stop talking about Jesus Christ. I believe she just kept telling people, come and see. And I really do believe that actually her life was changed as a result of that. I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up being one of the women supporting Jesus's ministry, and perhaps she even ditched, non-hubby number 5, ditched him and saw the light kind of thing. But God can use our insecurities. Now, the last one actually, sorry, I do beg your pardon. That was supposed to be our issues. I was going to say, and I didn't mention the word issues. Okay, it's our issues. One should be our issues. But that kind of leads into the next one, because the person I was actually trying to refer to as the insecure brother was our friend Gideon. Okay, so just a backdrop about Gideon, and you'll find it in Judges, I think it's 6 and 7. Where, so this, as I said, just to reiterate, the woman at the well talking to Jesus, that's really around our issues. Now I'm going to be talking about the insecurities, even though both of them, bless their cotton socks, have the same problems, issues and insecurities. But here we are, we have Judges 6 to 8, tells us about Gideon. Now, just a little bit of backdrop about what's going on at that time. Children of Israel, bless their cotton socks, disobeyed God. Their hearts wandered away from him. So he punished them. And he let them loose into the hands of the Midianites and the Amalekites, who basically everything the children of Israel laid their hands to, grew, had, owned, they just came in and plundered it. They just took it. Okay. So here we find, in Judges 6, we find Gideon all of a sudden, him, bless his cotton socks. We find him, it tells us in the scripture, he says he was threshing wheat in the wine press, as in, the two don't go together, but he was threshing wheat in the wine press. And he was doing that because he didn't want the Midianites to come and plunder what, he was doing. And so in the midst of all of that, an angel shows up and he says, hey, what's going on? And he says, I'm just, doing my own thing. But I love the way the angel addressed him. The angel addressed him and says, mighty man of valor, depending on the version that you have, mighty man of God. In fact, one of the versions I had, talks about that, mighty men of God. And that's just, it's interesting to think that, in our minds, we're thinking, who am I kind of thing? But there's God saying, hey, you're a mighty man of valor. And it's only later down the line you look and then you notice that God, that actually the bit about the insecurity comes out when he says, when God told him he was going to use him to deal with these enemies. And then he comes up and says, but who am I? I'm like the smallest of my tribe. In fact, his exact words were, oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. Now, that sounds familiar, right? Because I think Saul said the same similar things. So sometimes we kind of think because of our own insecurities, God can't use us. But in actual fact, he can, regardless. And if you continue to read between Judges 6 and chapter 6 to 8, you will actually discover that God says, that God actually used him and 300 men to deliver them from, the enemies they were facing. So what am I saying here? The whole point I'm trying to say that God can use your burdens, your passions, your giftings, your positions, your issues, and your insecurities to actually fulfill his purposes in life. And so there's a couple of principles I just wanted to share with you just to help you solidify some of the things that you've just heard. Number one, God can use you right where you are. Okay, that you don't need to go to university, you don't need to do anything. Just submit yourself to God and God will use you. Number two, he's already equipped you for the task. You've got what it takes. Now, if you think of yourself as a mobile phone, see yourself as like a mobile phone with all the apps that you need to function already downloaded on the inside of you. You've got everything. Remember, God has mapped out our life already. He's mapped it all out, and he knows that I'm going to need you to do this, you to do this, and you to do this. And so he gives us the skills, the giftings, and all the necessary things that you need. So you've already got what you need. Number three is that God uses those with a willing heart. You have to be willing to use what he's given you. And part of that is just submitting to him and saying, okay, here I am. Now, you remember my story when I said, you know what, when at my frustration, I want to run a coaching practice. God saying, I want you to write. And I'm, this battle going on until I submitted that and just focused on the writing. And then the doors started to open. When you start to fulfill your purpose and when you start to look at your assignments, both you and those God sends your way actually benefit from that, regardless of how you see that. Both you and the people you are sent to minister to, and I use the word minister to lightly because it could be in the business forum, benefit from that. And the last point, not the least, is more often than not, as I've said before, new doors tend to open once you take that first step. So sometimes some of us are saying, God, use me, and all he might do is give you a little jigsaw piece. And even though it could be a jigsaw puzzle made of 1,000 pieces, all you're going to get is a little piece. And he's saying, I've given you this, use this and use it, and start building on that. So, keep that in mind. So God uses us right where you are. You're already equipped to do the task. God uses those with a willing heart. Both you and those God sends you to always tend to benefit from whatever it is that he's sending you to do. And last but not the least, that doors tend to open as a result of your experiences. Now, moving on briefly, there's another area of expertise of our purposes that I really want to focus on here. Now, there are two, and I'm just going to deal with them very quickly. The first one is if we think about the world that we're living today, a lot of things are changing. Some people have had to change jobs. They've lost their, certain things going on in their world. So much is going to the point whereby a number of us are finding ourselves pivoting in different directions. Again, classic opportunities for God to use for every single one of us. Okay, so what are we talking about here? So what I'm trying to say here is bringing it closer to home, because I've talked about people in the Bible, and sometimes I find, when people say, oh, but, they were in the Bible, they had this. Well, actually, okay, I want to bring it closer to home, and let's focus on our worlds today and how God can still do all those things with what he's placed in our hands. And so the first one I want to talk about is how God can use your personal crisis, adversity, and challenges to actually fulfill his purpose too. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, that the book Bounce Back, okay, I wrote that as a result of some of the challenges that I'd faced and challenges that I found a number of people facing. And what I was discovering within the body of Christ is sometimes, because we go through certain situations, we almost do the equivalent of hanging up our boxing gloves and say, okay, this has happened, so I can't do it anymore, or this has happened to me, and could be out of discouragement, or just feeling like, oh, I can't do anything good, nothing good can come out of my life as a result of my challenges. And, that was something that God put a burden on my heart, because I thought, what, on one hand, we have a lot of people who are going through really difficult times, but have been able to flip their adversity on its head and make something positive. And yet we have another group of people on this side who's like, almost like the glass half empty. Oh, woe is me, I can't do this. It's difficult. And so I just sensed Father saying, write a book and capture the stories of inspiring stories of everyday people who are doing phenomenal things. And, I don't have the time to talk about all the stories. Some of them even include my clients, one of them writing a book while she had a real, life challenge, a life-threatening disease, and gone on to do phenomenal things as a result of it. But just one story I wanted to share with you. If you haven't got the book Bounce Back, I'll let you know how you can get your hands on it later on. But there's one phenomenal story that I want to share with you, and I'm going to share that with you through a video right now. And it's a powerful story of a young girl called Griselda. I will just share that and just watch the video. Let me just move this out of the way. Okay, so watch and be blessed.
Despite the beauty of this country, there's a plague here that most people can't see. And it's sexual violence against the smallest of children. They are particularly vulnerable because they truly have no voice. They have no power to fight back.
My name is Griselda. I would like to open my heart and share my story. Cuando tenía 13 años, fuimos con mi mamá y mi hermano a la iglesia. Cuando veníamos de regreso a mi casa, vimos a un carro color azul que se nos adelantó. Se bajó un hombre, me tomó muy fuerte y me subió al carro.
En ese momento es algo terrible. Lo primero que uno dice es, me la van a matar.
Los tres empezaron a discutir por quién de los tres iba a ser el primero en abusar de mí. Me sentía muy sola, tal vez me atrevería a decir sucia, culpable de lo que me había sucedido. Era un miedo bastante grande. No quería salir a la calle porque sabía que afuera había hombres y pensaba que todos iban tras de mí y querían abusar nuevamente de mí.
Sexual trauma doesn't heal itself. It needs appropriate therapy, as well as we believe in trying to hold the perpetrator accountable.
Un mes después conocí a este grupo de ángeles tan hermoso como es IJM. Pienso que cambió mucho. Gracias a la ayuda de las terapias pude superar eso y sentirme mejor conmigo misma, pero sobre todo al relacionarme con más personas.
The best efforts to educate people and empower people can be defeated if they experience violence and they're not given justice after having become victims of violence in their own communities.
Nos apoyaron mucho, nos dieron la confianza que necesitábamos, ¿verdad? Como para poder seguir el caso y terminarlo, ¿verdad? El que en ningún momento pues nos hayan dejado solos, ¿verdad? Y que se haya podido llevar la justicia, ¿verdad? Hasta donde tenía que llegar.
Sabía que no le iban a poder hacer daño a otras niñas, y fue un sentimiento de tranquilidad, no solo para mí, sino que también para mi familia, porque sabía que íbamos a estar mejor.
Ella, el año pasado que hizo su práctica acá, nos mostró cuán grande es Dios, porque ella pudo ayudar a otras niñas.
For those of you actively supporting IJM, I want to let you know that you're changing lives, that you're changing lives day in and day out as a result of your investment.
Okay, so I mean, I shared that intentionally just to share the story of somebody who'd been through a really challenging time. Her name was Griselda, and when I came across her story many years ago, I was so touched that I included it in my book. And let me just read an excerpt, because what they really didn't do it justice. She went to university and paying it forward by helping other girls who've been through similar things. Now, let me just read this bit. Now, IMJ's trauma therapy was critical to Griselda's restoration, and through the grace of God, she bounced back. She also found strength to forgive her perpetrators, but Griselda's story does not end there. In fact, what happened next was nothing short of amazing. Griselda went on to do an internship with IMJ, where she was able to help other girls who experienced a similar ordeal. Whilst Griselda never expected to have been raped at the age of 13, or at even any age whatsoever, the truth of the matter is it happened. However, despite the trauma, it is clear Griselda experienced what I call post-traumatic growth, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. In that she developed compassion for others experiencing the same trauma. She also used the opportunities to get involved in something she may not have ever been likely to have gotten involved with had she not been raped. In spite of the rape, Griselda decided to make something good come out of her experience. What a testament to God's restorative power her story is. In spite of the ordeal, she has been repositioned to change the lives of other people. Now, what we see there is what they call in positive psychology, they call it post-traumatic growth, because there was a study at one point where they were looking at what was it that caused certain people to be able to go through trauma and come out with a positive experience, change their life and create a new sense of purpose and meaning for their life. And what was it that hindered some of the people from moving forward? So this whole idea of post-traumatic growth came about. And you probably heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, but there was this post-traumatic growth, which is what they were saying is where people seem to be able to overcome or have positive changes as a result of a personal struggle in a major life crisis or traumatic event. And, for me, Griselda's story, I mean, those who know me, I call people like that my bounce back heroes, because they're not necessarily people in the Bible who we can say, oh, but that was in the Bible. This is a young girl who was able to flip her adversity with support, flip her adversity on its head and make something good come out of her negative experience. And I'm saying this to say this, that, you might be going through certain situations, you might be going through loss, separation, disappointment, setbacks, and everything else life can throw at us. But despite all of that, God can still bring purpose out of what you're doing. So it's about creating a sense of purpose or new meaning to whatever it is that you've been through. And that's why the book Bounce Back came about, to how to survive, thrive, and maximize your challenging situation. Now, some people don't believe you can, but I really do believe, and the world is full of it, from the, the late, his name passes me, anyway, it will come back to me in a minute, but every one of us have the opportunity to flip our challenges on its head. In fact, I remember, when my sister passed away, and some of you know that she passed away a few years ago. The fact was, it's a very painful experience. I'd lost Dad 11 years before then, but this was like completely different. But again, because of what happened, I felt a sense of, God, I wonder who else is going through this, feeling like, they got a dark cloud over their head, not knowing how to process their grief. So even through that whole process, I got into my studio one day and I started to record a series on overcoming grief and, overcoming grief. And yeah, as I said, in fact, there were times in that video I actually had to keep pressing pause and stop crying and then fix your makeup and then go back again. But out of that, a course has come out, and I'll tell you more about that later on. But I'm saying all of that to say, in spite of what you're going through, somebody somewhere can still benefit from what you're going through. And you don't need to be all singing or dancing, be the leader, get a PhD in the subject. God is saying, use that thing in your hands to what I call pay it forward. And we all remember the movie Paying It Forward, but that's an inspirational movie, by the way, Pay It Forward. But use what you already have in your hands to pay it forward, to help somebody else. Because believe it or not, you are literally a step or two or even more ahead of people who are in it right now. Just a few steps ahead of them. And sometimes all people need is that loving hands to say to them, it's going to be fine, you'll be fine. So keep that at the back of your mind, that God can actually use your challenges and your personal adversities and your crisis moments as a way of serving him by creating new purpose and new meaning. Now, remember, Griselda didn't set out to to support young ladies who'd been through what she'd gone through. I'm sure, if you'd asked her as a 13-year-old, she might have said, oh, I want to be a ballerina, maybe, or an air hostess or a nurse or a policewoman like I did when I was a lot younger than that age. She might have had different plans, but all of a sudden, something positive came out of her experience, and it changed the course of her life. And there's so many other stories in here that would really inspire you. In fact, when I was writing it, it just kept inspiring me to say, Grace, you've got no excuse. These are real life people who've been through what you've been through. Okay, so that's one of the things that God can do. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, just very briefly, was the fact that we've looked at how God can use our personal circumstances, our crisis moments, our adversities and challenges. But there's something else that God can do as well, which is all about our changing surroundings. Now, for some of us, our world, we've already said that our world is changing. Some of us, it could be your roles, your responsibilities, your job situation, your leadership role, your personal circumstances. It could just be that things have changed. Also, it could be maybe your attention or your focus has been changed as a result of, something that's going on in your world. Perhaps all of a sudden you seem to be more passionate about something or the other. It could be that all of a sudden you've developed a passion or a cause. You've developed a passion, for a cause, a project, a group of people, or whatever it is. Or the last ones, maybe you have a personal frustration or a personal dissatisfaction about something. Now, for me, I'll use myself as an example, and I always like to share, so that people see, things that we're talking about in real life and in action, and in addition to some of the things that I've shared earlier on, recently, a burden, call it a quasi burden stroke frustration came into my mind, whereby I discovered that there was a number of us, in particular women, and this is, the work that I tend to do with women, is the fact that some of us were doing a lot of work, giving all our gifts, our advice, our expertise, we're giving it away for free. And that kind of irked me. It irked me for so many reasons. Number one, I could relate, okay? Because many years ago, I was doing all this free kind of work. People say, Grace, could you help me? And I'm like, sure. How can I help you? And they say, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Absolutely, let's do it. And then they'll drop the bombshell to say, so Grace, how do I write a book? And I'm like, 5 minutes, you said? How do we do that? But back in the day, before I learned to, to be more assertive and put some stronger boundaries in place, okay, with the help of some of my coaches and mentors, I'd say, okay, yeah, let's talk about it. And before I knew it, I was coaching this person for weeks, months on end without getting paid. And then recently, I was coming across, for the last about 4 or 5 months, I've been coming across women, but I would say going back to actually Q4 last year, same kind of thing. A lot of people were going through the same, issues whereby, they were working for free, giving their expertise, whether it be consulting experience, whether it be their intellectual property, they're just, giving it for free and not being paid. And I really got frustrated with that. I'm like, God, in my heart, I was almost like trying to say, I know I've got, this to do, but this thing is just really because it's becoming a burden to me, Lord, and I want to do something about it. And a few Sundays ago, I say a few, but actually this was back in February, I was staring out the window as you do on a Sunday afternoon. And, I just decided I was going to write something. I believe that was inspired, and I just started to write, and I ended up with several thousand words after 2 hours. And I realized I was answering the question about, and giving solutions about how women can deal with this particular thing that was, this working for free and not getting paid. And as I said, it really, really bugged me. And so I just felt, Father, literally download. I mean, for me to do several thousand words in 2 hours, that's a record breaker for me. And that's where I know it was inspired. It wasn't me. And so I ended up with this book, and eventually I separated it out. And I'll just share my screen. There was, some of you may have seen this already, but there was this book, which is available. This part of those 1,000 words showed up in this book, and it's called Get Paid for Advice or Expertise You're Currently Giving Away for Free. It's a free download. If you look at the link, you can actually get that today. But, the whole idea was, the whole idea, oops, sorry, get out of there. Okay, let's go back to what we're doing. Okay, so the whole idea was really to help people, in particular women, move forward with that. But can you see how a personal dissatisfaction and a frustration coupled with a bit of a burden just bloomed into something different. Now, from there, I just felt Father saying, okay, I need you to do something a bit more, do more with that. And from there, I started the Monetize Your Expertise 12-week boot camp, which some people who are watching today are on it. By the way, we've started, it's kicked off, and we're having a blast. We're now in week 2 on Tuesday. And it's just been an amazing, amazing time, with women. And by the way, just in case somebody's thinking, how can I join? If you just put your name in the chat box or in the comment section and just say, wait list me, please. Just put the word wait list. And when we do it again, if God will allow me to do that, you'll be one of the first we contact. But we're taking a group of women through that whole process so that they can actually change their lives and the lives of people around them by using their expertise and all that God has given them wisely for the King and his kingdom, but also for their own personal needs as well. Now, again, I'm saying that to say, remember in the case of Griselda, it was her personal adversity, challenges, and crisis that led her down that path. For me, what led me down the path is noticing a trend. I'm thinking, this is not right. It doesn't sit well with me. Lord, I can't sit and do nothing. So I'm now throwing you the gauntlet. Has there been something of late that you have experienced whereby you're thinking, I don't like that, this is not right. Or, you have a burden about it, you have a passion about it, or maybe even a frustration, because sometimes I remember a big speaker said one time that, sometimes if you're looking for your passions, sometimes all you need to do is look at your frustrations, because that's giving you an indication of something that God has put inside of you to say, this is not right, okay, and do something about it. So there's no point just saying this is not right, but actually do something about it. So I've given you 2 things, in addition to the other 6 ways we've seen in the Bible that God uses. We've got 2 other things now, your personal experiences, as well as your personal frustrations. Now I'm throwing the gauntlet at you now to think about, what can you start to do? So as we start to close, think about, okay, so I've heard all this stuff that I've heard today. What is it that Father might be telling me about purpose and assignment? What can I start to do now? And remember, using my story about, remember back in the day when he said, write the book. And I'm like, no, I want to start a business. He's like, no, write the book. And we had this conversation until eventually it became, okay, yes, Lord, I will write the book. And hence, I've never argued since then, because his way is normally better, effortlessly. But going back to what we're saying earlier on, it's really about, touching people's lives and making a difference. So the gauntlet is now in your hands. What can you start to do now to use what's already in your hands? Now, just in case you're thinking, oh, I can't do anything, go to Exodus 4, one of my favorite scriptures, Exodus 4:2, where God is like kind of saying to Moses, I need you to go out there and save my people. And he's like, I can't speak. Oh, I don't, excuses. And God just kind of brought back to his attention and said, what's that in your hands? What was in the hands? It was a rod. Guess what? It's the same rod that turned into a snake, the same rod that he dipped in the water and turned it in the Nile into blood, the same rod that parted the Red Sea. We all have a rod in our own hands. It's about you discovering what that rod is and using it to touch people's lives.